Ambassador Klaxon of the Tentacled Dominion was having what historians would later describe as the most spectacular breakdown in galactic diplomatic history. His 17 tentacles flailed wildly as he screamed in 17 different languages simultaneously, creating a cacophony that sounded like a dying whale having an argument with a malfunctioning garbage disposal. "They have the Shadowmaw," he shrieked, his voice cracking somewhere between panic and disbelief. "The humans have actually captured a living Shadowmaw." Chancellor Vex from the Silicon Collective, who normally maintained the emotional range of a particularly dull calculator, had recalibrated his processors to maximum dread. His chrome face flickered between expressions of horror and what could only be described as existential crisis. "This does not compute," he repeated for the 47th time, his voice glitching with each iteration. "Species classification, impossible. Threat assessment, immeasurable. Recommended response, run screaming into the void." The emergency session of the Galactic Council chamber looked like a support group for cosmic trauma victims. Representatives from 43 different species sat in various states of shock, disbelief, and what the Zephyrian delegate was calling aggressive denial. The air recyclers worked overtime to filter out the smell of fear pheromones, nervous sweat, and what the crystallite ambassador insisted was the scent of impending doom. "Let me get this straight," wheezed General Gornak of the warrior clans, his four lungs struggling to process the information. "These humans, these pink, squishy newcomers who just discovered faster than light travel last week, have somehow managed to capture the apex predator that has terrorized 17 star systems." The holographic display in the center of the chamber flickered to life, showing archived footage of the Shadowmaw in all its terrifying glory. The creature was a nightmare made manifest, standing 12 feet tall with obsidian claws that could slice through battleship armor like butter. Its eyes glowed with the malevolent intelligence of a predator that had evolved beyond the need for mercy. The recording showed it casually dismantling a Korgon battlecruiser, its massive jaws crunching through reinforced hull plating like it was made of crackers. "The Shadowmaw of Kepler 442 billion," announced the computer in its annoyingly cheerful voice, "has been responsible for the destruction of 47 military vessels, the complete evacuation of 6 colonies, and the early retirement of approximately 234 therapists across the galaxy." Ambassador Klaxon's tentacles knotted themselves into what his species called the position of ultimate despair. "How?" he wailed. "How did they do it? Did they use some kind of planet-cracking weapon? Did they deploy their entire fleet? Did they sacrifice their firstborn to dark gods we cannot comprehend?" The truth was so much worse than any of them could possibly imagine. The humans hadn't used weapons. They hadn't deployed fleets. They hadn't sacrificed anything except their sleep schedule and a considerable amount of coffee. But the Galactic Council, in their infinite wisdom and finite imagination, could only assume that humanity had achieved the impossible through superior military might. "Perhaps," suggested the ethereal collective's representative, "a being of pure energy who communicated through interpretive light patterns, they possess some form of advanced psychological warfare technology. The Shadowmaw's mind could have been broken through methods we dare not contemplate." Chancellor Vex's processors whirred ominously. "Classification update. Humans are now designated as threat level Omega. Recommended diplomatic status, immediate and unconditional surrender." The chamber erupted in a fresh wave of panic. Species that had been mortal enemies for millennia suddenly found themselves united in terror of the pink bipeds who had somehow managed to do what the entire galaxy had deemed impossible. What none of them knew was that at that very moment, roughly 3 light-years away, the galaxy's most feared apex predator was wearing a hand-knitted sweater and whining because his favorite human was 5 minutes late with his afternoon belly rub. Luna Rodriguez stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror of the diplomatic transport ship and wondered, not for the first time, how her life had become this particular brand of absurd. She was 32 years old, possessed 3 veterinary degrees, and had spent the last decade treating everything from neurotic parrots to dogs with separation anxiety. Her biggest career ambition had been opening a practice that specialized in exotic pets. Instead, she was now apparently the galaxy's most important person, and she hadn't even finished her first cup of coffee. "Midnight, stop eating the furniture," she called through the bathroom door. not bothering to look. The guilty silence that followed told her everything she needed to know about the fate of Captain Morrison's favorite chair. The Shadowmaw that the entire galaxy feared was currently sprawled across what used to be a perfectly good diplomatic reception area, wearing a custom-made sweater that read, "I'm not a monster. I'm just misunderstood," in 17 different languages. The sweater had been Tommy's idea, though Luna suspected he'd been motivated more by terror than fashion sense. "Luna, we have a problem," came Tommy Chen's voice from the main cabin, pitched somewhere between panic and resignation. Tommy was her assistant, a 26-year-old xenobiology graduate who had signed up for what he thought would be a quiet research position. Instead, he'd become the galaxy's first expert in Shadowmaw behavioral documentation, though he still jumped every time Midnight sneezed. "Is it the same problem as yesterday?" Luna asked, emerging from the bathroom with her coffee mug clutched like a lifeline. "Because if the Galactic Council is still convinced we're holding Midnight prisoner, I'm going to need something stronger than coffee." The main cabin looked like a cross between a veterinary clinic and a very expensive pet store that had been hit by a tornado. Midnight had rearranged the furniture to his liking, which apparently involved creating a nest out of diplomatic cushions and what used to be the emergency medical supplies. The creature himself was sprawled in the center of it all, his massive form somehow managing to look both terrifying and adorable as he chewed on a toy that had once been a communication device. "Actually, it's a new problem," Tommy said, clutching his tablet like a shield. "The Council just sent a message. They're dispatching their most elite military advisor to assess the human threat level. Someone called General Throck is apparently en route to evaluate our weapons capabilities." Luna paused, coffee mug halfway to her lips. "Weapons capabilities?" "They seem to think we're some kind of advanced military civilization because we managed to, and I quote, subdue the unconquerable terror of the void through means unknown." Midnight chose that moment to roll over and expose his belly, making a sound that could generously be described as purring but sounded more like a freight train having pleasant dreams. His massive paws waved in the air as he waited for his expected belly rub, the picture of contentment. "Right," Luna said slowly. "So the galaxy's military elite are coming to investigate our advanced weapons technology, and our most dangerous weapon is currently hoping someone will scratch his tummy." "That's about the size of it," Tommy confirmed. "Also, I've been documenting everything for posterity, or evidence at our trial. I'm not sure which is more likely at this point." Luna walked over to Midnight and obligingly began rubbing his belly, which caused the creature to emit a sound of pure bliss that vibrated through the ship's hull. To anyone who didn't know better, it would sound like the rumbling of some terrible engine of destruction. To Luna, it was just the sound of a very large, very content pet. "You know what the really ridiculous part is?" she said, continuing the belly rub as Midnight's tail wagged with enough force to dent the wall. "I didn't even mean to adopt him. I was just trying to help a scared baby animal. Now apparently I'm the galaxy's most feared human because I showed basic kindness to something that was hungry and alone." Tommy looked up from his tablet, where he was frantically typing notes. "Should I put that in the official record?" "Put whatever you want," Luna replied, taking another sip of her coffee. "At this point, I'm pretty sure reality stopped making sense somewhere around the time I taught a supposedly unstoppable killing machine to play fetch." As if on cue, Aya, Midnight dropped his toy at her feet and looked up at her with eyes that contained all the patient hope of a creature who had learned that humans were good for belly rubs, regular meals, and the occasional game of chase the laser pointer. "The funny thing is," Luna continued, "I think he's actually happier now than he ever was being the galaxy's most feared predator. Turns out what he really wanted all along was someone to tell him he was a good boy." General Thrack of the Unified Military Command was what happened when evolution decided that a rhinoceros needed to be more aggressive and significantly less cuddly. Standing 8 feet tall and built like a battle tank with anger management issues, he had spent the last 3 decades of his military career perfecting the art of intimidation through sheer physical presence. He was also, at this particular moment, having what his species called a cognitive recalibration event, which was a polite way of saying his brain was trying to process information that didn't fit into any of his existing worldviews. "This is the human military installation?" he asked, his voice carrying the rumble of distant thunder mixed with profound confusion. The diplomatic transport ship looked exactly like what it was, a mid-sized civilian vessel that had been hastily converted for interstellar travel. There were no weapons visible, no defensive barriers, no signs of the military fortification he'd expected. Instead, there were what appeared to be decorative plants in the windows and a small sign that read, "Welcome, please wipe your feet." "According to our intelligence, this is where they're holding the Shadowmaw," confirmed his aide, a nervous Zephyrian named Zix, who had the unfortunate job of briefing a general who was rapidly approaching maximum bewilderment. The airlock cycled open, and General Thrake stepped aboard, his massive frame barely fitting through the doorway. He had prepared for this moment by studying every known form of psychological warfare, reviewing tactical manuals on advanced interrogation techniques, and practicing his most intimidating glare in the mirror. What he was not prepared for was the sound of humming. Specifically, he was not prepared for the sound of a human female humming what sounded like a cheerful melody while engaging in what could only be described as the most casual act of interspecies domination he had ever witnessed. Luna Rodriguez, completely oblivious to the arrival of the galaxy's most feared military commander, was giving Midnight a bath in what used to be the ship's main conference room. The Shadowmaw, the creature that had caused the evacuation of entire star systems, was sitting patiently in a makeshift tub while Luna scrubbed behind his ears with a brush that looked suspiciously like it had been designed for washing large dogs. "Good boy, Midnight," Luna said, her voice carrying the sort of casual affection that one might use with a beloved pet. "Hold still while I get the soap out of your fur." General Thrake's 4 eyes widened to their maximum diameter. The human was not only in direct physical contact with the apex predator, but she was voluntarily making it vulnerable by covering it in soap and water. This was either the most advanced form of psychological dominance he had ever witnessed, or the most insane thing he had ever seen. "The human appears to be torturing the creature through enforced hygiene," he whispered to Zix, who was frantically taking notes. "Sir, I think she's just giving it a bath," Zix replied, though his voice suggested he wasn't entirely convinced of his own assessment. Midnight chose that moment to shake himself dry, sending water cascading across the room and causing Luna to laugh. The sound of human laughter mixed with the creature's contented rumbling created an acoustic combination that Thrake's military training had never prepared him for. "Midnight, you're getting me soaked," Luna said, but her tone suggested she found the whole situation amusing rather than threatening. "The human has named it," Thrake observed, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper. "She has given the apex predator a designation of ownership. This is advanced psychological warfare beyond anything in our tactical manuals." Tommy Chen appeared in the doorway, carrying a towel and what appeared to be a hairdryer modified for industrial use. "Luna, do you want me to start the drying process, or should we let him air dry?" "Better use the dryer," Luna replied. "Last time he air dried, he rolled around on the carpet and got static electricity everywhere. Captain Morrison is still finding his fur stuck to the ceiling." General Thrake watched in fascination and horror as the human and her assistant began the process of blow-drying the galaxy's most feared predator. Midnight seemed to enjoy the attention, leaning into the warm air and making sounds that suggested contentment rather than the murderous rage that had terrorized star systems. "This is impossible," Thrake muttered, his worldview crumbling with each passing moment. "The Shadowmaw should have killed them all by now. Instead, it's submitting to grooming procedures with what appears to be genuine enthusiasm." "Sir," Zix whispered, "perhaps this is their secret weapon. They've broken the creature's will through systematic applications of kindness and personal hygiene." The general nodded slowly, his military mind struggling to process the implications. "Strategic compassion," he said finally. "They've weaponized empathy itself. No wonder they're so terrifying. They've turned the very concept of kindness into a tool of domination." As if to confirm his worst fears, Midnight finished his bath and immediately walked over to Luna. pressing his massive head against her leg in what any reasonable observer would recognize as a gesture of affection. Luna responded by scratching behind his ears, which caused the creature to emit that distinctive purring sound that had once been the last thing many beings heard before their untimely demise. "Good boy," Luna said softly, and General Thrak felt his entire understanding of warfare shift fundamentally. This was not just conquest, this was something far more terrifying, complete involuntary submission achieved through nothing more than basic decency and regular baths. Luna Rodriguez had dealt with nervous pet owners before, but she had never encountered anything quite like the delegation of galactic military officials who were currently arranged around her makeshift veterinary clinic like they were witnessing either a miracle or an atrocity. She wasn't entirely sure which interpretation was worse. "Right then," she said, snapping on a pair of examination gloves with the sort of professional competence that came from years of practice. "Let's give Midnight his routine checkup. Nothing too dramatic, just the basics." General Thrake, who had positioned himself at what he considered a safe distance, leaned forward with the intense focus of a student cramming for the most important exam of his life. His aide Zix was recording everything with the desperate enthusiasm of someone who knew he'd be writing the report that would either save or doom his career. "The human is preparing for direct physical contact with the apex predator," Thrak whispered into his communicator. "She shows no fear, no hesitation. This level of psychological dominance is unprecedented in galactic military history." Luna, who could hear every word of his stage whisper, decided to ignore it. She had learned that trying to correct the aliens' assumptions only made them more convinced that humans were engaged in some form of elaborate psychological warfare. Instead, she focused on what she did best, taking care of animals. "Okay, Midnight, let's start with your teeth," she said, producing a dental examination light that looked suspiciously like a weapon to the watching delegation. "Open wide for me, buddy." The creature that had once torn through battle cruisers like tissue paper obediently opened his mouth, revealing rows of obsidian teeth that could slice through reinforced hull plating. Luna calmly began her examination, checking for tartar buildup and gum inflammation with the same professional detachment she would use on any other patient. "Excellent," she murmured, making notes on her tablet. "No signs of dental disease. Though you really should stop chewing on the furniture, Midnight. It's not good for your teeth, and Captain Morrison is running out of chairs." The delegation exchanged horrified glances. The human was not only examining the creature's primary weapons, but was casually critiquing its destructive behavior, as if it were a mild inconvenience rather than an act of cosmic terror. "Now let's check those claws," Luna continued, lifting one of Midnight's massive paws. The claws extended automatically, revealing the razor-sharp talons that had carved through armor plating and caused the evacuation of entire colonies. "Good muscle tone," she observed, gently manipulating the paw to check for any signs of injury or infection. "No signs of stress fractures or wear patterns. You've been keeping these in excellent condition." Ambassador Klaxon, who had joined the delegation via hologram because he was too terrified to be in the same star system as the proceedings, began making sounds that suggested either profound distress or the onset of a panic attack. "She's examining its weapons," he gibbered. "The human is calmly evaluating the creature's capacity for destruction, as if it were a routine maintenance procedure." "It is a routine maintenance procedure," Luna said, finally losing patience with the running commentary. "Midnight gets a checkup every 6 months, just like any other pet. It's called responsible ownership." The word ownership sent a ripple of terror through the delegation. General Thrak's breathing became labored, and 2 of the smaller species representatives had to excuse themselves to process the implications. "Now, Midnight," Luna continued, producing a bottle of vitamins. "Time for your supplements. You know the drill." The apex predator that had terrorized 17 star systems sat patiently while Luna administered his vitamins, occasionally licking her hand in what appeared to be genuine affection. The sight of the galaxy's most feared creature voluntarily consuming substances provided by a human was too much for several delegates, who began updating their threat assessments in real time. "The creature accepts nourishment directly from her hand," Thrak observed, his voice carrying the tone of someone documenting the end of the world. "Complete trust." Complete submission. This is psychological domination at a level we never imagined possible. They're vitamins, Luna said, her patience finally reaching its limit. He was a little malnourished when I found him, so I put him on a supplement regimen. It's basic animal husbandry, not psychological warfare. The delegation fell silent, processing this information. Tommy Chen, who had been quietly documenting the proceedings, looked up from his tablet with the expression of someone who had just witnessed a historical moment. Luna, he said quietly, I think you just told them that Midnight was in poor health when you found him. So? Well, so they think you're describing the aftermath of an epic battle. Luna turned to look at the delegation, noting their expressions of awe and terror. You think Midnight was cranky because he was fighting for his life, don't you? General Thrake nodded slowly. The creature's initial resistance to human domination must have been formidable. He wasn't resisting anything, Luna said, her voice carrying the sort of patient exasperation that comes from explaining something obvious to people who are determined not to understand it. He was a scared, hungry baby who had been abandoned by his pack. The crankiness was just normal behavior for a juvenile predator who hadn't been properly socialized. The silence that followed this statement was the sort of quiet that usually preceded either enlightenment or complete psychological breakdown. You're telling us, Thrake said slowly, that the galaxy's most feared apex predator was simply having a bad day? More like a bad few months, Luna corrected, but essentially yes. The truth, as it turned out, was far more terrifying than any weapon the Galactic Council had imagined. Ambassador Klaxon, who had finally worked up the courage to attend the meeting in person, was currently experiencing what his species called existential vertigo. The feeling that reality had suddenly become optional. Let me understand this correctly, he said, his tentacles twitching with barely controlled anxiety. You're telling us that you didn't capture the Shadowmaw through military force. Correct, Luna confirmed, taking a sip of her coffee with the casual confidence of someone who had no idea she was reshaping galactic politics with every word. You didn't subdue it through advanced technology. Also correct. You didn't break its will through psychological warfare. I gave him belly rubs and taught him to play fetch. If that counts as psychological warfare, then I guess every dog owner in the galaxy is a war criminal. General Thrake, who had spent the better part of his career studying advanced military tactics, felt his worldview undergoing what his species called catastrophic recalibration. The human was describing a level of strategic thinking so advanced that it had bypassed warfare entirely and gone straight to voluntary submission. Then how, he asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone whose entire profession had just been rendered obsolete, did you achieve dominance over the apex predator? Luna set down her coffee cup and looked directly at the assembled delegation. I didn't achieve dominance over anything. I found a scared, abandoned baby animal, and I took care of him. That's it. That's the whole story. The silence that followed was the sort of quiet that usually preceded either a revelation or a complete psychological breakdown. Several delegates began furiously updating their threat assessments, while others simply stared at Luna with the expression of beings who had just witnessed the impossible. A baby, repeated Chancellor Vex, his processors struggling to integrate this new information. You discovered a juvenile Shadowmaw. About 6 months old, I'd estimate, Luna confirmed. Definitely not weaned yet. He was malnourished, dehydrated, and absolutely terrified. It took me 3 days just to get him to eat solid food. Tommy Chen, who had been documenting everything with the dedication of someone who knew he was recording history, looked up from his tablet. Should I mention that he cried for the first week? Cried? Ambassador Klaxon's tentacles formed what his species called the configuration of ultimate confusion. Big, heartbreaking sobs, Luna said. He missed his family. It was actually pretty heartbreaking. I ended up sleeping next to his enclosure for the first few nights because he was having nightmares. The delegation exchanged glances that conveyed a mixture of terror and bewilderment. The human was describing the galaxy's most feared predator as if it were a traumatized child in need of comfort and care. You provided emotional support, General Thrake said slowly, to a creature that had terrorized star systems. I provided emotional support to a baby who had been abandoned and was scared, Luna corrected. The fact that he grew up to be 12 feet tall and capable of demolishing battle cruisers is sort of beside the point. But how did you know he wouldn't kill you? Asked Dr. Vex, his logical processors struggling to make sense of the situation. Luna shrugged. I didn't, I guess. But he was just a baby, and he was scared. And I'm a veterinarian. Taking care of scared animals is literally my job. The concept of showing kindness to a dangerous creature without expecting anything in return was so foreign to most of the delegates that several of them began experiencing what could only be described as philosophical system crashes. Strategic empathy, General Thrake whispered, his voice carrying the tone of someone who had just discovered fire. They've weaponized compassion itself. It's not weaponized, Luna said, her patience finally reaching its breaking point. It's just being decent to animals. How is this such a difficult concept? Because Ambassador Claxon said slowly, no one in the galaxy has ever tried to be kind to a Shadowmaw before. Well, that's their loss, Luna replied. Midnight is actually a sweetheart once you get to know him. He's playful, affectionate, and he's got this adorable habit of bringing me presents. Granted, his presents are usually pieces of demolished furniture, but it's the thought that counts. The delegation sat in stunned silence, processing the implications of everything they had just heard. The humans hadn't conquered the galaxy's most feared predator through superior firepower or advanced technology. They had simply shown it basic kindness, and in return, they had earned its complete loyalty. This changes everything, General Thrake said finally. If humans can turn apex predators into pets through nothing more than compassion, then what other impossible things might they be capable of? Luna looked around at the assembled delegates, noting their expressions of awe and terror. You do realize that most humans are like this, right? We domesticated wolves into dogs, we turn wild cats into house pets, we keep birds and fish and reptiles as companions. This is just what we do. The silence that followed this statement was the sort of quiet that usually preceded either enlightenment or the complete restructuring of galactic civilization. Every human? Ambassador Claxon asked weakly. Pretty much, Luna confirmed. We're kind of notorious for befriending things that probably should eat us. 3 weeks later, Luna Rodriguez found herself standing in the center of the Galactic Council chambers, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, and wondering how her life had become this specific flavor of surreal. The assembled delegates looked at her with a mixture of awe, terror, and what she was beginning to recognize as the expression beings wore when they were trying to figure out how to surrender to someone who wasn't actually fighting them. The motion before the council, announced the session moderator, a crystalline entity whose voice sounded like wind chimes having an anxiety attack, that is, to grant humanity immediate full membership status in the Galactic Federation, along with all associated rights, privileges, and diplomatic immunities. All in favor? Asked Chancellor Vex, his processors apparently running much more smoothly now that he had categorized humans as terrifyingly benevolent rather than inexplicably impossible. Every appendage, tentacle, pseudopod, and electromagnetic field in the chamber raised in unanimous agreement. Luna had never seen a vote pass so quickly, and she was pretty sure she didn't want to know what that meant for humanity's future. The motion passes, announced the moderator with the tone of someone who was either very excited or very afraid. Humanity is hereby welcomed into the Galactic Federation as a full member species, with special recognition for their unprecedented achievements in the field of strategic compassion. Luna raised her hand. Could someone please explain what strategic compassion is? Because I'm pretty sure I've been doing it wrong my whole life. The chamber fell silent. General Thrake, who had apparently appointed himself as humanity's unofficial military liaison, cleared his throat with a sound like grinding stone. Strategic compassion, he explained with the patience of someone addressing a particularly dense recruit, is the advanced tactical application of kindness to achieve objectives that conventional warfare cannot accomplish. Your species has demonstrated the ability to turn hostile entities into willing allies through nothing more than basic decency and regular meal schedules. So, being nice to animals? Being nice to animals that can destroy entire fleets, corrected Ambassador Claxon. His tentacles forming what Luna had learned was the configuration of profound respect mixed with existential dread. Luna looked around the chamber at the faces of beings who had just voted to give her species full membership in their civilization because they were terrified of human kindness. It was, she reflected, probably the most absurd thing that had ever happened in the history of galactic politics. Right, she said finally. Well, I suppose that's one way to make first contact. Back on the diplomatic transport, Midnight was curled up in his nest of stolen furniture, wearing a new sweater that read Galactic Ambassador of Adorable Destruction in 43 different languages. He had become something of a celebrity, with beings from across the galaxy sending him gifts, treats, and what appeared to be fan mail. Tommy Chen was documenting everything with the manic enthusiasm of someone who knew he was writing the most important xenological paper in history. So, he said, looking up from his tablet, how does it feel to be the first human to accidentally conquer the galaxy through the power of veterinary medicine? Luna settled into her chair, finally allowing herself to enjoy her coffee now that the formal proceedings were over. Honestly, I just want to go home and open a quiet practice somewhere. Maybe specialize in exotic pets. I hear there's a market for experienced xenobiologists now. Should about that, Tommy said, his expression suggesting he had more news that Luna probably didn't want to hear. I've been monitoring the galactic communications networks. Ever since word got out about Midnight, Earth has been receiving what can only be described as tribute. Tribute? Mo. Diplomatic gifts from worlds that want to stay on humanity's good side. Apparently, there's a widespread belief that humans can turn any dangerous creature into a pet through the application of strategic empathy. Luna looked over at Midnight, who was currently playing with a toy that had once been a quantum communication device. And they're not wrong, are they? The scary part is, they're probably right, Tommy confirmed. I've already received 17 requests from different worlds asking if humans would be willing to help them deal with their local apex predators. Apparently, the going rate for strategic compassion consultation is somewhere around 50,000 credits per session. Strategic compassion consultation? That's what they're calling it. You've accidentally created an entire new field of xenological study. There are universities offering degrees in applied human empathy. Luna closed her eyes and took a deep breath. So let me get this straight. Humanity has been inducted into the Galactic Federation as full members because the entire galaxy is afraid of our ability to be nice to dangerous animals. That's about the size of it, Tommy confirmed. Also, you've been promoted. Promoted to what? Interstellar Ambassador of Adorable Deadly Things. It's apparently a newly created position with a salary that includes its own star system. Luna opened her eyes and looked at Tommy with the expression of someone who had just realized that her life had become a cosmic joke with excellent benefits. And all because I couldn't leave a scared baby animal alone in the woods. All because you couldn't leave a scared baby animal alone in the woods, Tommy confirmed. Midnight chose that moment to roll over and expose his belly, making his characteristic purring sound that now reverberated through the ship's hull with the sort of contentment that came from being absolutely certain that the universe was a safe and friendly place where belly rubs were always available on demand. Luna looked at her coffee cup, then at Tommy, then at the creature who had accidentally made her species the most feared and beloved beings in the galaxy. You know what the really ridiculous part is? She said finally. What's that? Know her. I'd do it again. Even knowing how it all turned out, I'd still stop to help a scared animal. Because that's just what you do. And somewhere in the depths of space, the Galactic Council was already updating their threat assessments, adding a new category that had never existed before. Beings who are dangerous, because they're too nice to be trusted. Humanity, it seemed, had found their place in the cosmos through the simple act of showing kindness to something that needed it. It was, Luna reflected, probably the most human way possible to accidentally conquer the galaxy.